Hello, everybody, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. To close out today's show, and today's week, for that matter, for the show, I'm going to do some stardom sit-em for the Sunday night game. We talked a lot about the implications of this game, about how different players can impact it, but ultimately, the list I compiled of players who I'm more comfortable to see in fantasy lineups and some players might have to shy away from is one that could preach consistency here. Without further ado, let's jump right into my final list and the final segment of today's show. I think this one might make people mad or make people skeptical because I do preach diversity in this Cowboys offense, but starting CeeDee Lamb certainly feels like a bet that I might want to take, a risk that I might want to take here, because not for nothing, even when CeeDee is the focal point of attention, he just handles it so well. If there was any other star player with as big a contract as him on the Cowboys, they would try and glorify it. But CeeDee takes the lumps. CeeDee knows his highs and lows. He knows his peaks and valleys so well as a player. And he's someone who I admire in a system that doesn't necessarily appreciate the whole rather than the individual. Because he knows, right, that he's always going to be targeted more often than not. And he knows that he has to be good. But even when he's not, he's always kind of the glue guy that I feel like is the saving grace of what the Cowboys did with both him and Dak. Tying him down, yes, I like the gameplay there. I like the plan to tie down your two guys. But I still have qualms about what that can look like in the future for him, especially in the long term. You know, when the Cowboys could just project to get worse and worse, you know, signing all these big players to money and not being able to either draft well or certain role players can step up. And if that's the storyline, then it's a sad reality, yes, that CeeDee Lamb is such a good receiver in such a not necessarily warped kind of system. But it does tell me a lot that, you know, he still wants to be consistent even in down games. And even when his offense isn't playing well, to the point where I can't ignore his fantasy value. A lot of people might be still very PO'd about how this offense has portrayed through the past couple of weeks, but it's still CeeDee Lamb. It's still someone who I respect a lot, and it's still someone who I think can make a difference in this game. And then the first sit, I think will have to be George Pickens, because of, like I said, the offensive game plan for this Pittsburgh team. I feel like they're going to want to exploit from the get-go this weak run defense. And I'm going to mention Najee Harris a little bit, and people will be skeptical about the result of what I think of him in this week's game. But much as I love George Pickens, right, he's certainly someone who can disappear in this offense, you know, when it starts to kind of be more run-centric. He's someone who can't necessarily keep the rhythm of the offense himself. You know what I'm saying? Because if you know you want Justin Fields to be a safe quarterback, if you want him to keep the football at all costs, then you kind of want the route trees to be a little bit safer. You don't necessarily want the explosiveness that Pickens does, maybe once in a while. But you certainly don't want it to affect, you know, how Justin Fields plays, because he's playing with house money here still. Let's not forget, you know, the questions we still have about him. But I still have trepidations, you know, about him as an overall fantasy receiver and what his fantasy value is going to look like going forward if, you know, Pittsburgh is going to continue with this kind of game plan. So that's why I feel like he is going to be a sit for me in this game. The next start, though, kind of counteracting the statement. I feel like Justin Fields is to start at the QB position in this game. And here's why. There will be opportunities for Justin Fields in this game to run a nice read option offense. Because he has been getting a little bit away from the dual threat abilities that we saw from him in Chicago to preserve himself, most importantly, his passing and throwing traits that really bring out the best in him. That's why I feel like in this game, even though it's not appealing from a fantasy perspective to consider Justin Fields the better QB in this game when Dak has more weapons at his disposal. But it's how Justin Fields uses his weapons, most importantly, his best traits to keep this team on schedule. It's not just all about individuality. It's about, playing within the structure of your offense, playing within the confines of a system that you feel good in, and most importantly, playing mistake-free football so that this offense can at least have some moments of value and moments of explosion in this game. And then I think, to start as well, I'm going to say Jake Ferguson. And he's been one of those players, like I said, who, any given week, has the ability to pop out. I'm imploring that this offense gets him going. Because he's a unique threat all over the field. Because of his size, because of his physicality, because of the fact that, especially when you're a struggling offense in the red zone, you need a guy like him. You can't just ignore him week in and week out. I'm sorry if I sound mad, but that's just the way it is with the Cowboys right now. And Jake Ferguson, not for nothing, I still think that he has the potential to reel off a couple good games and for people to remember his value again. It's the big thing. I think a lot of people forgot about what Jake Ferguson could bring to this offense just because they haven't been throwing the football as often as possible. Now, it's all going to depend, like I said, on how the Cowboys attack this game. Because the Steelers' defense, like I said, you can have big plays against them still. You just have to pick your choices. And so, it's going to depend on whether or not, the Cowboys have sustained drives where they end up in the red zone where Jake Ferguson could be more of a factor. Or they have drives that kind of, stall out and they want CeeDee Lamb to bail them out of it. So, it's going to be something to monitor. Something to be wary of in this game. But that being said, I'm willing to take the risk on a guy like Jake Ferguson. Just because, in those situations, he should be someone, at the very least, to actually targeting, at least looking at, to throw the ball into the red zone. Because that's his value. That's his value for the Cowboys, and that's his value in terms of fantasy. Getting you touchdowns in the red zone. Not necessarily the best yardage tight end, but still. He's someone who can make a difference for you. And the last sit of this game. Kind of am contradicting myself as well with this pick for the Steelers, but Najee Harris. And yes, I appreciate the fact that the Steelers want to run the ball more often than not. But this game definitely feels like one of those games where you're looking at a situation where the diversity of your running game could mean more. I feel like, yes, you kind of want to protect Justin Fields in this game a little bit, but you also want to find different ways to sustain drives and also make sure that you're putting points on the board, most importantly. Because that's the problem with this Pittsburgh Steelers. Can they put enough points on the board in this game to really make it interesting? Because there is going to be a way where the Cowboys can make this chippy if they possess the ball well as I hope they will. But for now, I'm looking at Najee Harris as someone who is going to be boom or bust. It's ultimately up to you. I hate saying that, but it really is kind of one of those conundrums where the opportunities for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense are boundless, but I don't know if they're going to utilize them to great effect. And so, if it comes down to the run game for both teams, then I feel as if Najee Harris could be bumped up to a start, maybe even a flex position, because I'm comfortable with him in that situation. But for now, I don't necessarily like how he profiles. Let me know what you think in the comments, because that will just about do it for this show. Thank you all for tuning in. I've been Christopher Shepard. Be sure, if you feel so inclined, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. Also, continue making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way to contribute and interact with the show. Go check out my fellow podcasters as well. They're doing their own thing in their own right. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network, first and foremost, most of all, for allowing us to record this show. Both that being said, thank you all. We'll see you again next week at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Monday with another great show of fantasy sports. But as always, I'm out.